far so good.
Well, we hope together we'll enhance that, and we'll be able to talk to our experiences, and hopefully through that you'll be able to learn that much more about the human and the transgender experience in the world today, in the Jewish world. So we're going to begin by each of us spending a few minutes introducing ourselves, pretty much saying where we are today. So my name is Yischa Smith. I live in Yerushalayim. I'm blessed to live in Yerushalayim. I am here at Limmud in the capacity of the faculty member at Pardes Institute for Judaic Studies. Are there any Pardes alumni here by any chance? Oh, so we have two. I'm supposed to keep a record. By the way, for alumni, I have buttons. I have the Pardes button if you would like. All right. Very nice. So I teach at Pardes spiritual teachings, Hasidut. This year I'm teaching on the spiritual dimension of authentic living through the lens of several Hasidic masters, the Baal Tanya, the Piaseczna Rebbe, Kodesh, Rav Kook, Reb Simcha Bunim, because they're very relevant in my own life. I wish I would have learned them many, many years ago, but the way it came to be, I didn't. I'm teaching them now. I also have a private spiritual mentoring practice. It's not really geared towards the trans community or trans people. Of course, I openly invite and encourage anyone who's on any kind of a journey to come and see me, who would need a little bit of what's called hadocha ruchanit, like private spiritual guidance along the journey of authentic living, however that looks to each individual. And what else can I say about me? Yes, I live in Yerushalayim, and
you made Aliyah.
And my book, thank you. I made Aliyah in 1985. I left. Who asked if I made Aliyah? I made Aliyah. At that time, I was married to a woman living a very Hasidic, Haredi, Chabad life. By the way, I'm giving a book reading later today, reading excerpts from my memoir, which are here for sale and signing, where I'll talk a lot about my past. But I did make Aliyah in 1985, left Israel in 1992, spent visits back and forth, moved back in 2011, and transitioned in the States. Went from Yaakov to Yiscah. Here, yes. And I think that's about where I am today. It's an amazing place to be here today, meaning right in this room, because I feel so honored to be with Abby, not only because of who she is, but the contrast between us. I hope you see the depth of the diversity within a very small sliver within the Jewish world, and so much the more so, ala chat kama v'kama, within the world at large. She's younger, when you're a parent and then you start to befriend someone who's younger than your youngest child. I have 6 children. She's younger than my youngest child, so wow, am I getting older, or is she really that young? And here we are, different ages. We come from different backgrounds, as you'll see in our next little description. We come from different backgrounds. We're doing different things now. We live in different places, and yet we share a very special, sacred, common place in our journeys together. And that's why we're here. So, thank you.
First of all, before I go into where I am right now, I am like, I don't know if it would be the right term, and it will feel like I'm just repeating you, but it's amazing for me. Your book was actually a big, almost role model for me before I knew you personally. It really helped me through my, when I was going to transition. I also like the few names that you mentioned, because while I know we come from very different backgrounds, at least at some parts in our life, we kind of were in a very similar place. Because I also grew up Hasidic, but specifically a few of the names that you mentioned of Hasidic teachers are really, really important to me until today.
Wow.
So I'm really looking forward to see how you'll turn out.
And Sadhguru and Chabad together.
I actually did that. Specifically, the media just loves to say Satmar. I went to Yeshiva in Vizhna, and I will get to that later. So my name is Abby. I'm currently a third-year student at Columbia University. I'm studying Women's and Gender Studies and Political Science. I'm also I'm teaching at B'nai Dresher and BJ Hebrew School in New York City. I've also been teaching at Romamu Hebrew School this year. I'm also doing quite a bit of political work. I'm currently working very heavily on a campaign, on a city council campaign in New York City, which I can't say which one yet because it's not official, but you will, if you will continue to follow me, you will hear about it in a few weeks. In addition to that, since I came out, which was November of 2015, I came out in public fully, I've been trying to raise awareness a lot on transgender issues within the Jewish community where I come from, which is the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community, and within different Jewish communities that I am working with right now, and the world at large. But I think for this session, I'm going to focus on the Jewish community. Currently, I would say the part that there's like two parts to it, and the part that relates to the ultra-Orthodox community is a very different goal and a very different place than when it relates to the broader Jewish community. And by the broader Jewish community, I mean everything else besides ultra-Orthodoxy. Because the challenges are entirely different. When I started out, I used to joke that I'm going to be really happy when I see the ultra-Orthodox community hating trans people. Because that would mean that they're going to have to recognize that we exist. When I grew up, I didn't know trans people exist until I was 20. I had my own feelings and what I felt, but I didn't know we exist. So now, a big part of what I'm trying to do is trying to let other people within that community and people in the world at large know that they are trans people, even in such an isolated community, and there are people who need help. I started a Facebook group, a support network for trans people who are ultra-Orthodox. It has now over 30 members. And by statistic, there's probably about 3,000 of us, if I look on general statistic based on the general population. And there's no support. Not just there's no support, there's no visibility to the extent that, as I said, they wouldn't even hate us. They wouldn't even mention us. And that's, I think to some extent, I could almost call a success on that part, that in the last 15 months, I managed to get them so angry that they have started talking about it, at least not officially yet. Which that will be the next step, to get an official letter from a few Orthodox rabbis against me, that will be, or against the community, that will be the next step. But for now, they recognize that a lot of people in the community know that we exist, and I might get to that, to a few stories later. At the same time, I've also been living and working in what let's call a broader Jewish community. I have, in the last 5 years in my life, worked with and worked at, in some capacity, with every Jewish denomination, every major Jewish denomination. And it's really interesting to see how different denominations have different approaches. Some, specifically in modern Orthodoxy, still have a way to go, although to say I was shocked in the beginning to see how many even Orthodox people and communities were welcoming, and at the same time how many were really, really not. And then in every other denomination, and I might go in later in more like details based on my own experience, there is work to do. Some places are accepting, which is by now every Jewish denomination in the U.S. besides Orthodoxy, Conservative, Reform, Reconstruction, and Renewal have passed official resolutions in one way or another welcoming trans people, but there's still a lot of work to do, too much work to do. So these are, I think this is going to be the two facades, the two parts that I'm going to try to talk about today. And just one big disclaimer, I might make statements that seem like general statements about a movement, about a denomination, but I just saying it now and just keep that for the whole session. I'm talking about my personal experience, and every person has their own experience, and every individual and every community has their own approach on how welcoming they are, how accepting they are. So please don't take it the wrong way.
And I'm so glad you said that, because I also wanted to address even the title of this session, the state of the Jewish transgender community. That does not exist. There is no the Jewish transgender community. You're seeing two individuals here who have individual experiences. We meet in certain places, we're different in other places, and any community is made up of individuals. Surely there is no one, the Jewish transgender community. And also, I do take issue, now that I made Aliyah years ago as an Israeli, and I'm very proud to be Israeli, when I see in the past few years the American Jewish community has come a long way in accepting and integrating transgender individuals. Israel in many ways is much more progressive than what's happening here in the United States. And I've addressed that at lectures in Israel, both in Tel Aviv and Yerushalayim and Haifa, and I've addressed it all over at Limmud UK. I've addressed it at different other Limmudim here, and when I've been in scholar in residence at different synagogues, I've addressed that too, in terms of policy making, from top down. From bottom up, value change, that is, again, that's according to the individual.
And if I'm allowed to say in defense of the description, and again, that's where I love that we can disagree.
Isn't it?
But it's not as much disagreeing with you, and I agree that at least in policy, Israel, specifically Tel Aviv, is almost a haven for LGBT people altogether, and trans people even more. There's like Ma'avar, this organization in Israel, which I think I have only watched them from afar, but it seems to be doing great work. We don't have, in the US, we still don't have a Jewish transgender specific group. There's a lot of amazing Jewish LGBT groups. But at the same time, I feel like it's a bit pointing towards Jewish denominations. Where here we have had Kesever reform lately, and then the Reconstruction and Renewal movements going back and far.
There were movements
here
in Israel.
Who have officially came out, like written responses, written official declarations coming out in support. But in Israel, where a big part is you either Orthodox or you have the Rabbinut who, and you have Chilonim, you have secular people. So it's a lot. I think it's less applicable. It's not necessarily different. It's less applicable in Israel.
Okay, so moving on to our backgrounds. So my background is very different because of my age and where I grew up.
I think it would be boring if you both had the same story.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. Like I'm just amazed. Like I'm meeting you, and then yesterday in one of my sessions that I gave, this young boy, and I had lunch with him. He's all of 13 years old, and he's in the middle of a gender transition. I was born in 1951. So you can do the math. I'm 65 and a half, right? And I knew as far back as when I was 5 that something's not right here when I'm looking into the mirror. But I didn't know from words like gender identity dysphoria, gender transition, gender this, gender that. I didn't even know the word gender. And I surely had no language with which to even express this to my parents. Mom, I'm looking in, like, how was school today? Oh, I'll tell you how school was. No way. I felt not only was I suffering from a misconnect with my own body, my mind and my heart were one place and my body was in another place. I had no language to communicate it. I really believed this was my truth. I was the only person on the planet suffering from this. Imagine a world pre-internet. It did exist. It did exist. I didn't have my first computer, and I went online with AOL in 1997. So growing up in the 50s and 60s, I felt very isolated in that I intuitively knew I had a secret. There was a secret, and I had to really protect it. And it was with shame, and it was with fear. There was a lot of pachad, a lot of fear. And then, at 20 years old, after my first visit to Israel, I encountered my Jewish identity. I come from a Jewish family. We were like rising middle class to upper middle class, conservative Jewish family, kept some of the traditions. When I say religious, I'll refer specifically to Shomer Shabbat, Shomer Kashrut, keeping the Sabbath and Kashrut. My parents did not, although they did impart to me amazing values that I later learned are in Perkei Avot. But I didn't come from an observant Jewish home. And when I went to Israel the first time to work on a kibbutz, thank God the kibbutzim are in Israel and not in Russia or in India or in China, otherwise I would have gone there, but I discovered my soul, my Jewish soul. And it was incredible because I really now, the conflict became even greater because there was now the problem was multidimensional in how do I enter this new world of a Jewish identity with this so much gender division. Like that first time I was at the Kotel at the Western Wall, and I had to decide, oh my gosh, do I go to because I don't come from an Orthodox home. This was the first time I had to make a decision which side of the Mechitza to go to. And it really was very, very difficult for me. I still didn't have language when I got involved with Chabad. And I became the director in the Chabad house in the old city, raising a family, beard, black hat, the black coat. I look at pictures of me, and then when I look at your previous picture, oh, there's someone, that's where we have a, like, is that really me? That was one long perm. It was a very long perm. Yes, that's why I don't get dressed up for perm. And my girlfriend say, what are you going to get dressed up as this year? I said, I did that for years. For 50 years I dressed up. I don't do perm anymore. I eat the Suda, I give them the Shalot Manot, but I don't dress up. Right. So even after I got divorced, I could not tell my therapist. In 1991, I was living in the old city. During the Gulf War crisis, I used to take my gas mask to the therapist's office with me. Breaking up a family with 6 children, leaving, being the director of Chabad House in the old city, you can imagine the trauma that internally I was experiencing, still keeping this a very safeguarded secret. It was only after I returned to the States, after I was divorced, and I left the Torah world temporarily. I left the Torah world and I left Israel. It was only a year later that I even read about someone who underwent a gender transition journey. And I said, oh my gosh, I found the keys out of this prison. And I was 41 years old. 41, I didn't even know. Now, of course, it existed before, but I was in the Chabad world. And in the Chabad world, we never had a TV. We didn't really read many periodicals or newspapers. I know that it existed. I later learned that what I suffered has been existing for many, many years. But my reality, my experience was, this was the first time. I was sitting in Bryant Park in New York, reading in The Advocate about this woman who, from New York, who transitioned. And I said, wow, amazing. Now at least I have language. I don't feel isolated from the entire world anymore. If there's one more like me, there's got to be at least a few more like me. And then it took a few more years before I actually began the transition, but I now had a goal. There was light at the end of the tunnel. So my experience was really, it was so magnified by not having language, and by not having community, and by not having a lot of what you're creating, like on Facebook. I'm listening to this, like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. I for whatever reason, I bear no resentment, God forbid. I thanked God for my journey many, many times, but I wouldn't wish that on the next person. Like, I'm really grateful that the younger generation, if I may say that, yes, I may, I'm a few years older, that the younger generation has more resources, has more support, has language. That was as much for me a part of the problem as the gender identity dysphoria. So yes, so that's what I bring to as my past to the room.
So I'm going to try to put in my past in 5 minutes. That might be impossible. And for these really interested, I'm doing like literally after this at 12:45 session where I'm going to explore my story in the media. So a lot other parts of the story will come out there. So to give a short background of where I come from, it's really important for me to also talk a bit about my family, because that really affected me, not just the community where I came from, but even my family specifically. So I grew up in Williamsburg, which is, simply said, a Hasidic enclave in New York City. They are trying to recreate what I think is something that never really existed. They have this like magical shtetl life of the 18th century, but if you actually read actual history of what was going on in Eastern Europe in the 18th century, what they are creating is, I don't know what it is, it's not bad. They do dress in 18th century clothing, they speak only Yiddish. I grew up with Yiddish as my first language, Hebrew was my second language, Aramaic was my third language, English was my fourth language, which I only really learned when I turned 20. I learned ABCs a bit in school. In addition to that, the Hasidic community has been ruled, for people who don't know that, has been ruled by dynasties for the last 200 years. Meaning leaders and what they call rebbes, which are kind of more than leaders. They are supreme leaders, they are the political, financial, spiritual, they're leaders in every way. They are not chosen by merit most of the time. By merit, yeah. 95% of the time, they are not because they're the best scholars, they're not because they are the nicest people, they are because their father or father-in-law was the Rebbe, so they take over. And people just go with it. Why exactly? I don't know. That's for anthropologists to decipher. these families have been the same, as I said, for about, depending which family, some 150, some 250 years. And they constantly marry each other. It works almost like European royalty worked in medieval times. There's sometimes where actually, and a lot of people hear the politics that's going on in Hasidic communities, a lot of them are just, most of them actually, are just family struggles. So for example, if you're going to get an example for that, the Rebbe's, the leaders of some of the 4 biggest communities in the world currently are brother-in-laws. That includes Belz in Israel, Vishnitz in Israel, both of them, Satmar here in the US, and New Square. They're all brother-in-laws. So that's just a short, that's just a short description of how it has been working like that for hundreds of years. My family
business.
Yeah, it is a family business. It's just a family. My family comes from such a family. Currently, both of my grandparents had their own synagogues. They're not really big leaders, but if I go back 2 generations, on every side, they come from Hasidic leaders. One example that I like to use is the 2 of the biggest Hasidic leaders of New York Judaism, New York Hasidic Judaism after the Holocaust, which was one of them was the Baba Rebbe, who lived in Bar passed away in 2000, and the Square Rebbe was the founder of New Square, which is a bit more infamous. They were both my uncles. One of them on my father's side, one of them on my mother's side. I'm descendants from their dynasty. So that's just an example. But the reason why I'm pointing this out is because this really affected me also growing up, in terms that my family was isolated within isolated. What I mean by that would be the Hasidic community is isolated as it gets. Like, we don't have access to general newspapers, no movies, no TV shows, no internet officially, no music, everything. They have everything on their own. You can't even interact with outsiders. In addition to that, my family would always have some restrictions that usually didn't have like exact rules. Like, for example, it was taboo for even men to drive. For women, it's taboo to drive in the community in general. Not that there doesn't exist, but it's taboo. My family was even for men. Why exactly? Not sure. Everyone was expected to work within a Jewish field. So, for example, my father was a teacher for as long as I remember, teaching in a yeshiva, religious school. My grandfather did something very similar before he turned just being a rabbi. Almost everyone, all of my father's and mother's siblings did something similar within the community. My family often goes out to eat. There's no such thing. I don't remember my family going out as a family to eat, and I'm talking the kosher restaurants that exist in Williamsburg. They just don't do it. This is where I grew up. I struggled with gender, or should I say better, I had a gender identity that was different from what I was told since I remember myself. I didn't really struggle with that because I don't remember a time where I was like, what am I? To me it was always, hey, I'm a girl, but why is everyone telling me I'm a boy? And I was trying to deal with that, and I had different ways of dealing with that. I remember a time when I was between 7 and 9, and I used to read a lot. At some point, I used to collect clippings from newspapers that were talking about organ transplants, and I was like, here, at some point I'm going to do a full body transplant, transplant. This is how it works, right? Like a transplant. Then when I was around 9, I gave up on that, and I wrote like a prayer that I would say every night. We said the Shema before you go to bed, and I added like a small prayer. But to me, it was never to get to that these feelings should go away. It was always like, let me just wake up as a girl. In addition, even at that point, if I was thinking about transition, and as Yiscah said, in that part we are very similar. I had no language to that because I also grew up without the internet. Until I was 20, it was the first time I browsed the internet. I had no language for it, and I didn't know there's anyone else like me. So I was trying, I would try to make sense of it, but even then I was afraid of any physical transition. And I was like, I just want to wake up as a girl and everything should be solid. When I was around 12 is when this started, gender dysphoria started resulting in religious dysphoria, let's call it. I never thought about it that way, but now I'm thinking about it. It was a very similar experience of me trying to make sense of why am I feeling this identity that doesn't belong and there's no one else like that, and gender, there's no one else, so that's impossible. I did know there's a lot of people who are not religious, so maybe religion is the issue. And I started reading books that I wasn't supposed to, which I say was fairly easy in my community because we always joke that there's a list of books that you can read, not a list of books that you can't, because most of the books you can't read. As I started going through that process, I got to a point when I was done 15 where I almost felt that that's it. I'm done with Judaism. I'm just going to leave and do I don't know what. I had no context for that either, not even leaving the community, but I'm done with that. That's when I met an Israeli rabbi who lives in Yerushalayim, and you know, Moshe Erlanger. He's a writer. He is within the Hasidic community, but a bit of an independent figure, so to speak. I read some of his writings. I really like it. I really loved it. Compared to contemporary Hasidic Jews that have very little to do with real Hasidic theology and real Hasidic thought, he's in some ways within the confines of the Hasidic culture today. He's trying to bring back the real spirit of Hasidism, which was a focus on spirituality, a focus on a populist movement, rather than rigid customs and laws that everyone just has to follow. And he was also a mystic. He introduced me to Jewish mysticism. And I went with it, first of all, because it did help me a lot with religion, but it also, for the first time in my life, I found a gender identity that I could relate to, and gender became fluid on me. Yesterday, when I did a text study on that, one of the sources was this specific text that I read for the first time when I was 15. I went to that point to the yeshiva in the Catskill Mountains in New York, in Chaim Yishalek, which is the flagship institution of my community, Vishnitz. And like an isolated place in the middle of nowhere, but I managed to get my hands on certain books. One of them was Shar HaGulgulim, which is the Doors to Reincarnation, written by Isaac Luria David, the father of modern Kabbalah. And you read it, and suddenly souls are, the gender of souls, the gender which in result is the gender of people, is fluid. And there's something like transgender migration of souls, and a soul ending up in a wrong body, which when I think about in modern language, it's when a brain or like your identity ends up in their own body. There was also like this interesting dynamic where suddenly, just like in modern lingo, where like sex and gender are different, and biological sex and gender identity could be different, that also exists in Kabbalah. And it was really interesting for me. So that kept me going within the community for another 4 to 5 years, during which I got engaged, got married, and had a son. All of that when I was 17, 18, and 19, which is very typical, almost stereotypical in that community. When you turn 20, boys and girls, and you're not married, you're old. So I got married, and then in big parts during the time before my son was born, I actually just had a journalist phrasing it last week in an article that was published, phrasing it, gender began punching me in the face, which is very much what happened. The way we look on kids, and that's something that even in the Hasidic community, is we try to gender our kids before they're conceived almost. And the second they're pregnant, it's like, oh, what's it going to be, a boy or a girl? Are we going to have a pink or a blue nursery? Because we all know that boys cannot be in a pink nursery, right? So, and it's something that's so present. And I started feeling like, I don't know, this is my kid. What I'm feeling, I didn't know any medical terms for it. Is that genetic? Maybe it's genetic. No, it's not, but maybe it is. I don't know. How is my son? How is my kid? How are they going to be? What am I doing here? And it started getting harder and harder to just get away with metaphorical, almost Kabbalistic excuses. That ended up resulting once again in good. That ended up resulting again in what I would call a religious exploration. That resulted in when my son was about a year that I finally left. It was a long process. Leaving to some extent was almost harder in some extent, at least culturally, than transitioning, because I was coming out of a ghetto, so to speak. I was coming out of not knowing anything. I finally left. And when I left, the first step that I took was education, because my education consisted of being able to write my name in English, that's it, and solving a long division of math, which I was really proud of, but that's it. That's the only education I got in the Hasidic community. I worked hard on my high school diploma. I always joked that if I would work as hard as I did to get at Columbia, as I worked to get into Columbia, I would be perfect. I really, really worked hard and had my high school diploma, and cutting short later SATs, and then I applied to Columbia. When I got into Columbia, and which is something that happened throughout my journey, I constantly told myself that there are certain brackets that I have to achieve, then all these gender things are just going to go away. Which obviously doesn't happen that way, but from what I've heard from other trans people, I wasn't the only one that taught that. We constantly try to say, oh, if something is going to happen and everything is going to be perfect. finally, after going through a rough time at school at times because of that, I started transitioning physically, I would say, September 4th of 2015, which is a date that I will never forget in my life. And I came out on November 11th, 2015 is when I changed my name on Facebook. Call that coming out in some way. And one other detail that I am by now proud of, when it happened back in November, I was confused and didn't know how to deal with it. For some reason that I still don't know until today, the blog post that I wrote coming out, on a blog that up to that point had maybe 1,000 views going for months, it wasn't a popular blog, suddenly got 20,000 hits overnight. And ever since, I have at that point, without even realizing, I gave up on a lot of my privacy and a lot of my private life. And for a month, the first month, as I was getting like inquiries from media and speeches, I was like, should I do it? Shouldn't I do it? I had my own internal like, where am I going? Like, how do I want to exploit my life? Do I want to be as public as it could get? And I knew it could start escalating out of control, which kind of is. And that's when I started realizing that there's a lot of other people, which I already knew for years before, but there's a lot of other people in the community who need help, sometimes just in the form of knowing that other people like them. I had an anonymous blog before I came out, and I had so many people reaching out anonymously, saying that they need support. And I started realizing that I have an opportunity right now, while I'm going to be totally honest, exploiting my community background and exploiting my family background, I could have an opportunity to educate people within the community, educate the Jewish community and the world in general, that there are people here who are not just struggling. And I think we can all agree that even in today's America, specifically even today, the last few months, but in general, it's so hard to just transition. Add to that, being an immigrant, pretty much being an immigrant, not knowing anything about culture, not knowing the language, not knowing anything, it's really hard. And I would do whatever I can to change that. So that's where I am right now.
So, there are 2 points you mentioned that what we wanted to know is share some of our actual experiences in the Jewish world. But I would just like to acknowledge 2 points that we really do share in common. I also prayed. What drove me deeper and deeper into the Haredi world, into Chabad, into even a place of leadership, was I was constantly praying to God, a little bit differently than you. It included, though, some of what you said. I prayed for either Aleph or Bet. I really didn't care. Either I said, God, I'll do whatever it takes. I don't come from an observant home. I'll go the full 9, whatever you want. You know, peyot, I'll grow peyot. Black hat, I'll put the back, grow black hat. Whatever. But please, you need to do this one little favor. I mean, if you could split the sea, you could do this for me, right? Let me wake up tomorrow morning, and may my feelings be different. Let me feel like I'm a guy. Here I am, already married to a woman. I have 6 children. I have a beard. I'm wearing this black coat on Shabbat. So I already have the outfit. Can you do something, maybe some type of lobotomy in my head? So at least I feel like I'm in harmony with that. Or, even better, let me wake up and my body's a woman, right? I didn't know about transition. I didn't even know about transitioning. But I really didn't care what it was. I said, you wave your magic wand, and as long as my brain, what goes on in my machshavot, sorry that I always jump to Hebrew. I just did a lot of lectures in Israel, so, yeah. So whatever I'm thinking, whatever I'm feeling, may it be in harmony with my body. And of course it did work. It didn't work. Even though we are supposed to believe that the sea split, this miracle did not occur for me until many years later when I really did pray to God just to help me live in truth. And then I began to live in truth. The other part that you just said, which so resonates with me, my life also has been totally out there once I released this. And I've been on Israeli TV many, many times. I lecture all over Israel. I've lectured all over the world. And people have asked me, it's enough what you did. Why do you have to be so public? You know, and I paid a very heavy price. I've paid, you know, in terms of privacy and also issues with my family. And it's for the same reason. I cannot tell you, so I'm going to jump into one of my experiences in the religious world in Israel, as a result of me being so public. We know that pikuach nefesh, saving a life, our own life and other people's lives, is of paramount importance. It's a supreme value in the Torah, to the point where the Gemara says each person is like an olam katan, a micro of the macro of an entire universe. One day this person comes knocking on my door. He found out about me through either a television interview, a radio interview, I don't know how, but this person got in contact with me, called me up on the phone, and he said, I would like to come over and just talk to you for a couple of minutes. Is it okay? The person came over, knocked on my door, I opened the door, and there's this Haredi man looking at me. He lives in Mea Shearim. I asked him to come in, please. Would you like a glass of water? Have a seat. And he was like shaking. His body was shaking. And I said, whatever it is you want to talk about, you're in a safe space. You're in the privacy of my home. You're not being recorded. I don't know really what you want to talk about. I honestly thought he was going to talk to me about a child of his. There was already gray in his beard, and it was very long, so the person was not 18 years old. And he began to tell me that he feels he's a woman. And he's already a grandfather. And he's literally like he lives in Beit Yisrael. Yeah, he lives in the middle of the middle of the middle. When you hear the word ultra-Orthodox, that's modern Orthodox compared to like his race, right? And he said, I just need a place I could sit and just talk about it. And I could see his body begin to stop shaking. So I asked him a few questions. Have you ever thought about transitioning? What does it mean to feel like a woman? Is it that you just like to wear women's clothes? And I tried to ask him questions so he could feel comfortable talking about his feelings, because I never had anyone to talk about my feelings. And he said, you know, I really don't know what I want at this point in my life. I know that if I were to do what you did, I would be expelled from my entire community, from everything that I know my entire life, and my family, and I'm already a grandfather. So he said, I want to go, but can I ever visit you again? I said, of course you can. A month ago, right, and I hadn't heard from him in about 2 years. I thought about him constantly. And I asked him, do you want me to refer to you in which gender? He didn't even understand the question. He didn't even understand, like, why would you refer to me as a woman? I wanted to be sensitive and honor his feelings. But that's already 50 steps ahead where he is right now. I didn't hear from him so I'll refer to him as him because that's what he prefers. I hadn't heard from him in about 2 years. A month ago I was in New York speaking at the Jofa conference. 2 days before I left Israel, I had just finished a Skype mentoring session. I have a private, as I mentioned before, spiritual mentoring practice. I literally said goodbye. We disconnected on Skype, and there's a knock on my door. I said, Misa, and he said some name. I don't know, Moshe. Where I live in Nachlaot, you answer the door, even you don't have 5 locks, and you have to see what they look like and get their whole autobiography. I just opened the door, and there's this person looking at me, and it is cold. I will say it's cold, so it was not totally shocking. But he had like this scarf wrapped around his face with some kind of hat down like this, and he said, Yiscah, it's so-and-so. Can I come in? And I didn't know who the so-and-so was, because I didn't recognize his face. It was like bandaged up almost. He comes in, unwraps the scarf. I see this long beard, takes the hat off. No, he left the hat on, and I'm looking at him. He's wearing a skirt with boots and tights. And he said, remember me? I said, oh yes, you visited me 2 years ago. And he said, this is the first time. I hope I can say this without crying. I said, how did you get here? He said, I drove, and it's the first time I've ever worn a skirt in my life, and I didn't know where to go. I didn't know where to go, and then I thought of you, and you said I could always come back. I said, come in, let me give you a hug. Sit down, let me give you a cup of, it's cold outside, it's cold this winter. Let me make you a cup of tea. He said, no, just let me sit here. Just let me sit. And said, where did you change? He said, well, I changed in the car. And he hides the clothes, he hid the clothes. No way could he have them in his house. And then he went into my room where I had a full-length mirror. He wanted to look at himself, and he would go like this, and like this. And he said, thank you for just allowing me to be here. I said, may I give you a nicer looking hat? I want to talk first. So he said, well, I didn't come here to take any clothes. I said, let me give you a gift. I gave him this nice beret that I thought would look nicer. He put it on, and I could see his smile. I totally saw a woman, and he's totally a woman. Then he left, and he said, what you've given me a place I can come to. That's why I had to release this book. That's why I had to do that. I'm still right now, I have chills because I'm seeing his face inside. So he has a safe place, and I don't, Nachlaot is not that far from the Esherim. He wouldn't dare walk though, he drove. So that's one experience. So, yeah. I'll share one more personal experience, and then maybe you'll share one, and we'll just come back and forth. Yeah. Yeah, and then we want to definitely open it up. So I want to share two contrasting experiences that, and I'll try to make it really short. And they're really, really important because I don't want to just give the bad stories, although the bad stories have a lot of emotion and they paint the Haredi world in a way that's not really true, because there is, just like the way there's no Jewish transgender world, there's no Haredi world, there are Haredim. And some of them are the nicest and some of them are the nastiest, just the way there's in Tel Aviv. I know a lot of people in Tel Aviv, and some of them are the nicest and some of them are not yet the nicest.
Not yet,
Say that.
that's
You know, you're Shomer Shabbat or not, you're not yet Shomer Shabbat. So there's the nicest and the not yet the nicest. But these are two contrasting stories. I was in Seattle visiting a family many, many years ago, and the husband was going to a shtibel in Seward Park in Seattle, and the wife didn't want to go to shul. She said, well, you go ahead. I know you like to daven. You go with my husband, and just, you know, when you're through, you'll come back, and so on and so on. So we went. It was a little shtibel, little Hasidic shtibel in Seward Park. And I went and I started davening in the women's section, of course. And it was already many years after I had transitioned. I was very comfortable, and I wouldn't have been uncomfortable anywhere else. So in the middle of the davening, one of the women poked me, and she said, the rabbi is at the door. So the rabbi, who was wearing a stroimel and a long beard, you know, a typical look, whatever you think of a Haredi look, was there, and he motioned for me to come out. So I came out. I mean, the Rav was calling me, so I come, right? And these were his first words. I'm not exaggerating. Is there anything I should know about you? So I said, well, the first thing you should know about me is that you're young enough for me to be your mother. And I'm a guest in your synagogue, and I've learned that it's proper when a guest comes into your synagogue, you say, Shabbat Shalom, Baruch Haba, how are you? Do you have where to eat? That's where we enter a dialogue. That's where the narrative begins. And he looked at me and he said, you know, you're right. He said, Shabbat Shalom, good Shabbos. You know, how are you? Where are you staying? And I told him. And then he said, now, is there anything I should know about you? I said, well, is there anything I should know about you? Where do we begin? I mean, I'm like in my 60s. Because there's a lot you should know about me. This was before my book was released. Otherwise, I could have had a book and say, pay me after Shabbat. Here's my book. You can order it about it, right? But I knew what he was driving at. He said, well, you know what I mean. I said, are you asking if I was born with gender identity dysphoria? Is that the question? He said, well, what is gender identity dysphoria? I said, that's what you need to know about me. And Bekitzer, you know, like in the short version, I said, yes, I believe that's what you're after. And he said, do you feel comfortable in the women's section? I said, yeah, I feel comfortable in the women's section. Actually, I came here to daven. I didn't come here for this discussion. But what is it that you really want? Because I'm sensing that you want something. He said, well, if I told you that there was a woman in the women's section, you can see his Gemara mind with the ifs, with the sugya developing further and further. If I told you there was a woman in the women's section that was uncomfortable with you being there, what would you do? I said, I would leave. because I'm a guest here, and if I'm not wanted, I have nothing to prove, I'll leave. So, let me ask you, is that what you want to know? Do you want me to leave? He said, no, I don't want you to leave. I'm just wondering about your feelings, because I have to manage her feelings also. He said, and you've cleared it up for me. It's really good to know. And he said, please go back in, and I know now that you have where to eat. And we said, good Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom. The host, on the way home, he said, I was livid when I heard what he put you through. Because it was a shtibel, it wasn't like a huge, like the great synagogue in Yerushalayim. I mean, people pretty much heard all the discussion. He said the woman that somehow got his attention, if she would have had her head in the siddur, instead of looking at, she does that with all the women. She looks what they wear, how they talk. He says she's such a troublemaker. And what I realized from that is, when I'm not defensive, because I'm not looking for approval, I'm not looking for permission. Just, if you tell me you don't want me here, I'm out of here, because I have nothing to prove. I came here to daven, I didn't come here to be loved. And anyway, I'm a guest. How that diffuses so much. It just diffuses so much. So that's one experience. The other experience is the Rav of one of the two shuls where I daven now, in Nachlaot. Raz Hartman, Nachlaot. He said he wanted to come over and have a talk with me, and because he has a concern and he needs my advice. So he came over, and he said there's a woman in the synagogue that she's a little bit put off by your presence, and I don't know how to respond to her. So can you guide me? Can you help me help her? Well, this is the difference in a mindset. Because you seem to be so comfortable with everybody, and you have so many friends here, and because my living in Yerushalayim is, I'm not a transgender activist, I'm a spiritual activist. I work with spiritually engaging text with all different kinds of people. And being an older person in a very young shul, I have a lot of younger friends that seek, that I'm like their ima in absentia, because most of them have mothers that live in the States or in Europe or South Africa. So he said, I really need your help, and I don't know how to help her. And I want to help you because you're both members of my congregation. So I said, well, Roz, I have a very simple solution. We're all adults here. Why don't you just tell her that, give her my email, give her my Facebook, give her my WhatsApp, give her my phone number. Let her call me up, or I would call her up if you want, and we'll arrange to meet for a cup of coffee. He said, I told my wife that if I came to your house and brought this to your attention, that's what you would say. He said, thank you so much. So here, people could be thinking, oh, the Rav is coming to my house. He wants to talk to me about an issue that he needs my advice on. What's he going to say that I'm not welcome in? You could play all different kinds of scripts in the mind. He needed my help. He needed my help to be there because he's the leader. So what that taught me is we really need to give people the benefit of the doubt all the time. And my biggest learning in being an observant woman, I don't say I'm Orthodox. I don't say I'm conservative. I can't be pigeonholed. I am spiritual and I observe. I'm Shomer Shabbat and Shomer Kashrut. You can figure out all the labels and call me whatever you want, but I don't say that I'm Orthodox. I'm traditional. Masorati, lefi halacha. That what I've learned is that by not being on the defensive, but by trying to share and being compassionate, really compassionate, and putting myself on the other person's place. Like it says in Pirkei Avot, don't judge anyone until you're in their place. And give everyone the benefit of the doubt. It's incredible how big my circle is. How many different kinds of people are in my life, rather than feeling pushed up against the wall. So my experience in the Jewish world, there's been some very bitter, very painful moments, but all in all, it's been so much more, so much better than I ever imagined, ever imagined. So I leave with you those two examples of direct experiences.
I'm going to try to do something very similar and give some actual stories that I've had. I believe I would have a lot less than you. I've only been out for 17 months, and I haven't written a book yet, although it is in the works. But I've had, and I want to again focus on two different parts. One of them is working with the ultra-Orthodox community, and one of them is working with the broader Jewish community. With the broader Jewish community, in addition to just being, I would say I am a trans activist, and I'm really proud of that label. I'm also in education, specifically in Jewish education. I've worked at several different Hebrew schools. I've worked at 2 different Jewish camps. At one of them I was Yahadut Jewish spirituality director, so I've done a lot of work within the field of Jewish education in the more non-Orthodox, or I like the term post-Orthodox better, Jewish communities. Not all of them were post-denominational. Some of them were very much denominational. I worked at Romanai, for example, which is very much denominational. The camp that I worked at last year wasn't, but they all have different. So I want to first tell one interesting story which relates to where I come from and to my background. And the story I've published that before, and I constantly try to publish stories that I have, usually just on my blog, not in major media, because I want to keep them personal and write them the way I like to write them. So this, I published that before, but I would love to share now here. So when I left the community, when I started to leaving the community, before I was transitioning to public in any way, there were different people who tried to get involved. Most of them in a negative way. I rarely found someone who was actually interested in really engaging me, but there were some people. In addition, my father and my parents in general, to their defense, at that point, were trying to what they considered, and I think at least my mother actually believed that this was helping me. My father, I think, a bit more conservative, but my mother actually believed this was helping me. Was trying to push me and set me up with different people, different rabbis, and different what we would call mashpiyim, people who are, I don't know how to translate
spiritual mentors.
Spiritual mentors. Oh, exactly, spiritual mentors, so to speak, that would try to talk to me and help out. There was this one, let's call him a rabbi. I don't know if that's exactly the title that he would prefer, but definitely people call him that. And there was this one person that I knew, and I was put in touch by him. Initially he reached out to me, but I'm fairly certain that someone in my family put him up to it and gave him my information. We spoke a few times, we went for coffee, and that was like, as I was getting separated and getting ready for the divorce, and it was fairly common that I've joined Footsteps at that point, which is an organization working with people who leaving ultra-Orthodoxy. So he was trying to help out, he was trying to save my soul, or whatever that was. He was nice, I'm going to say that on the spot. He was really nice, really amazing. And we spoke back and forward. It got to a point where I started realizing that we don't really have a common language. He's coming from a very, very different place where I was at that point. He wasn't really open to have real conversations and the questions and the issues that I had with the community. Like, he wanted a lot to say a certain statement, and then he would let me argue with it, but up to a certain point, what he would call red lines. He's like, oh, I don't talk about that. I don't talk about the sexual abuse that's going on in the community. I don't talk about the community abusing social programs. I don't talk about that. So there's certain things, even like, and then philosophically, he was okay to go up to certain levels. Like, he would indulge me, like when we were talking about biblical criticism, that was okay. Any questions relating to what I would have, like, what does a soul mean, or anything that got a bit more, anything that touched God, it was like, oh, that's off limits. So we couldn't really, I realized this is not going to get anywhere. And we broke up, so to speak, the spiritual mentorship in a fairly sudden way. He really didn't like it, and he tried reaching out to me after that for a while. Then, I would say the last time I was in touch with him was in 2013. I haven't heard from him in 2 years. We're moving on. About 15 months ago, November of 2015, when I came out, and I had a lot of people reaching out to me, people from the community. I was shocked to learn that there were some people in the community who were not LGBT in any form, as far as I know, who were trying to be supportive, all of them lay people. I'm still yet to find a legitimate ultra-Orthodox rabbi who is not in some way LGBT who would even want to talk to me. And I would be up for that if there's anyone who is up for that, but I haven't met anyone yet. And I'm getting a text message from this rabbi that I worked with back in 2013, really kind of cryptic and doesn't really say a lot, just like, I really need to meet with you, I really want to talk with you. And I was like, oh, okay, is he gonna now come up with this whole like another spiel of being like, no, you don't want to do that, you don't know what you're doing. I was like, it was a few days after I came out to my father, and that was very much where it went, and I had no patience to indulge now in other ultra-Orthodox persons trying to convince me that I'm going down a bad path. First I was like, nah, I don't know, not today, not tomorrow, I'm too busy of trying to push him on. And he insisted, he's like, listen, I'm in Brooklyn right now. He doesn't live in Brooklyn. I don't want to say where he lives, not to give away anything. But he's like, I'm in Brooklyn right now, I would come up, I lived at Columbia, the Upper West Side, I would come up at the Upper West Side, I really want to meet you as soon as possible. And I was like, okay, there's limits to how much I can fight that person, and I was like, okay, let's meet, and I wanted to meet with him in public, like just to make sure, I don't know what he's going to be up to. Fine, let's meet, let's go out, we were going to meet in the street and see what he wants. He comes out, looks just like he looked all the time before that, and he started to cry. Really, really bitter. And it took me, and I'm not overestimating, it took me at least 5 minutes to just be able to calm him down a bit and get some words, like, what do you want? What's going on? Finally, he's telling me, he asked me, do you know one of the reasons why I reached out to you back then? Like 2013? You should think it And I'm like, I don't know, someone put you up to it? He was doing that? I have no idea, I don't know. He's like, I used to see you in the synagogue. And he mentions the synagogue that I used to go from time to time when I lived in a certain place. And I always felt like I have a great LGBT radar. We call it a gaydar, a transdar, whatever you want to call that. To me, you could never fool me. You never passed as a man to me. And I share similar feelings. I was indulging with you. I was trying to work with you because I was hoping maybe together we can figure something out. And now that you came out, which he's telling me, I didn't know back in 2013 that's going to happen, and he's telling me, I knew that's going to happen. And he's good at his job, being a spiritual and guidance, spiritual mentor. So, I mean, it's possible that he knew stuff that even I wasn't as much aware of it. And we did have back then kind of deep conversations within certain limits. And we went on like that for a few minutes, and then he started like catching, like kind of stepping back right away, and he's like, but I can never do anything like that, I don't want to, kind of similar to the story that you were telling, but like, I can do anything, I don't want to have anything to do with that, but I want you to know that just knowing that someone did what I can do, and we're talking about an older person, doesn't have grandkids yet, but some of his kids are married, we're talking about an older person. Just knowing that there's someone who did it, and he didn't want to even say that it gives him hope that he will be able to do it one day, but he's like, knowing that someone did it kind of gives me a feeling of saying, okay, someone did what I couldn't, someone's doing what I couldn't do a while back, and I want you, he's like, you should continue to do that, you should, it's amazing what you're doing, which is what he's trying to tell me. And then I asked him, before we finished talking, can I write about this? Can I publish that? And we discussed a few changes that I made, and it's a blog post. You can look it up. It's on my website. It's titled "The Night I Cried with a Rabbi from Brooklyn." We changed a few details that don't really change the story, but to make sure that no one could identify him. I also insisted on using male pronouns intentionally. I was like, I can use female pronouns in the article. It doesn't matter. I insisted. I don't know why exactly. And the most sad part for me was when he told me before he left, you should know though, I'm not going to reach out to you ever again. I can't afford it. It's too hard for me, and I'm also afraid what other people might figure out. I can be in touch with you, but I just wanted you to know that, and I wanted you to tell you that. And like I was shocked. I was shaken by the story. Although the more I think about it, I'm like, according to the statistic, it's about between 0.3 to 0.6% of the population is trans. There's no reason why it shouldn't be the same in ultra-Orthodox community. So I feel like I shouldn't be shocked that these stories exist, because of course they are out there. But it does. It's sad, and the story having with him was another push that told me, you gotta do that, continue doing that, and I can't care what people are really gonna say, because this person, I don't know how much I was able to help him, and I wish there was something else I could do, but I can't, and he made it very clear that I shouldn't try reaching out to him. Thankfully, I know that he knows where to reach me if he really wants to do that. But this was a story where, talking on the part of working with the ultra-Orthodox community, of what's going on in there. Now, while this is maybe there's a slight positive part to it, but mainly very negative and very sad, my experience with the broader Jewish community has been extremely, extremely positive. From the second I came out, even before I came out, when I started coming out to people privately, I'm currently a member of a synagogue on the Upper West Side called Limmud, which the story how I joined them is also a long story, and I actually wrote about that also. I wrote a post titled Limmud XO, which was my feelings and about that. It's a long story, but at least I came out to both of the rabbis there before I came out publicly. The rabbi and founder of Limmud is the one who offered in the beginning and helped me come out to my father in a really amazing way. It has been something that I couldn't have dreamt that could exist. Not just, I wouldn't have dreamed 5 years ago that it exists within the Jewish community. I wouldn't have imagined that it exists, period. It has been just so amazing. Two parts of that I want to point out is, one of them was, when I felt ready to come out with the rabbis there, and I tried to reach out first to the rabbi and founder, David Ingber, and that was during the high holidays of 2015, and it was naturally very hard to get a hold of him during that time. So I ended up coming out first to the assistant rabbi, Yischa Smith, who people know her. She's amazing. Like, I am, in the most non-sexual way possible, I'm in love with both of them. They're like people that I couldn't have imagined my life.
Who's the second rabbi?
Rabbi Jessica Meyer. They are both people that I couldn't imagine my life. I couldn't imagine transition without their support. And one of the first things that when I finally got to come out to Rabbi David, it was like, when you want to do a name change at the Torah. And to me, up to that point, that didn't even cross my mind. While I was getting more and more involved with the Jewish community, and to be honest, I made more Jewish friends by being involved with Jewish queer communities in the last 17 months than I made in the 3.5 years before since I've left. The New York Jewish queer community, which is most of the time interdenominational, and events that we have, and support groups are something that's beyond almost conceivable. It's really amazing, really supportive. Some of my closest friends I made through that and met in different events in different places. And I would agree with you what you mentioned before. There's no like specific community for that, but we do have a lot of gatherings and a lot of support groups. And he asked me that, like, do you want to do like, have you chosen a Hebrew name, and like, do you want to do something? I was like, I guess that would be really cool. I never thought about it. I started looking online and trying to see are there any rituals for that. The only thing that I could find was a ritual that was, I think, composed in combination by Rabbi Kukla, who is a Reform rabbi on the West Coast, and Joy Layden, who is Joy Layden was she is the first trans woman to work in an Orthodox institution. She teaches at Stern College for Women and YU College for Women. She wrote also a great book. I love, like, I'm gonna be like, I'm writing a book right now, and like, I'm looking on 3 trans memoirs that I want to like see like which kind of style to read. It's your book, Joy Layden's book, and Jennifer Boylan, which are 3 of my favorites. These 3 are my 3 favorite trans role models. And we started looking, we started working on it, and then Rabbi David was like, you know what? Okay, this is something that might not exist out there. Let's create it. Let's play around with the ritual, which I'm going to admit is something that I love. I love taking Jewish rituals and turning it upside down. I love taking Judaism and, at least from a very ultra-Orthodox perspective, using it against itself. And to me, the concept of, which is how a name change is done in traditional Judaism, is added to Rav, it's an official Mishaveri. To me, doing that was almost the strongest statement that I could make of saying, I am a Jewish rebel and at the same time very proud to be Jewish in my own way. We worked out this really, really amazing ceremony. The live stream of it is online. It's on my YouTube page and it's on the Roman live stream page. It has been an event that even by now, and so like one example that I would say how much it meant to me. I've done a lot of speeches. I've done in the last year over 50 speeches, and I love checking that a lot. The only speech that I don't remember what I said, and in order to know what I said, I have to go back into the video, is what I said here, like at the Torah. I'm usually good at hiding emotions. There I got fairly bad. And it was an event that I still keep on hearing from people who see it online. And I'm actually working right now on almost publishing the ritual, the way we did it, and put it officially online that people could use it. Was one of the most intense, spiritual, and rebelling, yet affirming experiences that I've ever had. And the fact that like I was in a community with probably like 200 people, I'm not sure exactly how many people were there, and it was this intense experience, which showed me that not just I can find Jewish communities that are accepting, but I can find a Jewish community that's gonna celebrate it, a Jewish community that's gonna encourage me to be yourself, and we can do that. That's not just okay in a Jewish setting. That is a Jewish thing. It's a Jewish act. The way it was framed by the rabbis during the event. Exactly. It was framed as something that is the most Jewish thing that you could do, in some extent, which was an experience that was, as you might be able to tell, I have no words. It was really an intense and really amazing experience, which I'm again proud that it's out there, and it has had like, I don't know, 12,000 views on YouTube, which maybe is not that much, but I know that so many people who might be looking for it, and so many people who might be struggling would see that maybe they wouldn't have to go through the path that I took, which was first feeling that I don't have no place in Judaism and I have to reject everything, and then trying to come back. Is just know that there's maybe a space for that. One other short anecdote that I want to share is, I'm just going to share that. And I'm just going to make this say a statement rather than an anecdote, which was that in almost every Jewish educational setting for kids that I have been since coming out, and while I never preach, I never obviously telling kids this is what you should do, and I usually work with middle school kids, which is when it tends, at least in the modern world, it tends to be a bit more that kids are trying to figure out gender and sexuality. Almost in every setting, by being public, I've had kids in one way or another who would talk to me or talk to their other educators about like what this is doing to them and how they feel that they could do it for themselves. And I'm talking about kids already who have their own internet and kids like live in communities there where there's LGBT people all over the place. And it made me realize how much we can do by just being. And then just being out. We only have 5 minutes left, but yeah, let's see if there's any questions.
That was absolutely fascinating, and this is a topic that has been absolutely fascinating to me for some time. I have a friend who's a professional lesbian. He's a professional Jew. She's a profession is working in the lesbian, leading not transgender, but the homosexual community as an activist. So I have some like more in-depth information. But my questions are not Jewish specific, but transgender or more specific. One question I've always wondered and never known who to ask or exactly how to ask: how does being transgender affect your sexual orientation? As far as if you got divorced, you both are married, previously married with kids, and then divorced. And I assume got divorced because of the orientation issue, or maybe not. And then if you are a born male turned female, are you then you were originally attracted to women, and now are you still attracted to women? And all those kinds of questions.
It's a great confusion that people get a lot, but the very short answer is they have nothing to do with each other. Sexuality and gender have literally nothing to do with each other. I actually pointed it out yesterday when I was doing when I was teaching it this gender in Kabbalah, which is shocking. Even in Kabbalah, it's very clear. When you go back, it's very clear. In the 16th century, which I think is a big deal, not just for Judaism, but in general, that someone said that in the 16th century. But it's very clear that sexual orientation and gender have nothing to do with it.
The world identifies us differently. Now the world identifies me as a straight woman. Before my transition, after my divorce, there was a 10-year period. The world would identify me as an effeminate gay man.
So if you're identified as a straight woman, regardless of what the world thinks, you were originally a male married to a woman and attracted to women, presumably.
No.
No, you weren't.
No.
And the sexual orientation does not change.
Okay, so you're still attracted to women?
No.
Men.
Even though I was married to a woman, that was part of the deception, part of the inauthentic life.
So you're attracted to men.
Yes.
And
You
this
have a
is
good
a-
husband for you?
this is-
I feel I'm talking with a shotgun.
That's something that's never been able to get straight in my head. So just out of curiosity, does everyone everyone you meet know you are transgender, or just some people think you're a straight woman and
Some think even here, some people think I'm born straight woman. Some people, well, they don't know if I'm straight or lesbian.
But they think you're a woman.
Yeah.
Right.
I have the same thing. I've gotten the question from a lot of people, definitely more than over 10 people who asked me just this weekend, how come I know Talmud? They taught that women are not taught Talmud in the Hasidic community.
That's what you grew up with.
But they don't.
Yeah,
Yeah,
as a man.
but they just thought I'm a woman. I grew up as a woman in the Hasidic community, so everyone knew that. Ironically, the part that I grew up Hasidic is more obvious than the part that yeah.
Because only men
So-
learn
Yeah.
Talmud.
So that's actually a great lead-in to my question, which I have to start with a comment first. So both of you are so authentic and articulate and full of grace. So it is natural that you would be such spokespeople for the movement and as advocates. That being said, when you meet someone in, say, a social situation, let me preface this. When I first met you, Yiscah, in the UK a little over a year ago, you were talking to Sheridan. Sheridan introduced us. I didn't know who you were. I just thought, oh, this is a very elegant and warm woman. That was actually my initial thought.
Oh, my mother would be so happy.
And then you said, I'm doing some sessions if you want to come. So I looked you up in the program and found out your background. But otherwise, I would have just said, oh, let's go have a coffee. And so, given your roles in the trans world, in the Jewish world, and the world at large, do you ever wish, or do you ever take the opportunity to just get to know someone separate from your role, where you say, I just want someone to know who Abby or Yiscah is, regardless
Most of my life.
of that? And is that difficult, or does that, yeah?
It's very organic, it's very natural, very authentic. Because I didn't transition in order to be labeled transgender.
Right.
I transitioned to be right with myself and to be authentic with standing before God. And those who see me as a woman who has transitioned, fine. I mean, I'm totally out. However, that's a sliver of a much bigger identity. So I flow very naturally back and forth.
I guess my question is more, do you find it difficult to have that separation? I guess it depends on the context and where you are.
Yeah, like when I'm teaching at Pardes, for example, I'm so devoted to my school. You've come, some of you have been at my presentations here. When I'm presenting or teaching Jewish spirituality, I try to leave my whole ego at the door. And when I come into the class, I'm there for my students. When I'm cooking for Shabbat and I'm having a table full of an assortment of people, I'm focused on making the best meal I can for when I'm babysitting for my grandchildren, I'm focused on getting on the floor with them and playing. so I experience all different parts of my life with my life.
That's personally, I'm just going to say in short, it's still it's getting a bit easier the more I start making new friends who don't remember me from before. But currently, it's still fairly hard for me because most people that I know my background, know my story. But I'm going to be bold and say I sometimes go on dates from people I meet online just for that reason, because I want to interact with people who don't know my background. And I would, if it gets something serious, I always say it, but at least in the beginning, I want to just interact with people. I am Abby, you are whoever you are, and let's have a chat. And so definitely want to do it. It's hard for me currently, but I think it's going to get easier the more I'm going to meet people who don't know my background.
Hi. So this is partially an answer to this woman's question about the gender identity and sexual preference. So I have a transgender son-in-law who's married to my son. So my son's partner transitioned from female to male, but then his sexual orientation was gay. So you're right in that gender and sexual preference really don't have much to do with each other. But now my son-in-law and my son, they're members of CBST, which I'm sure you well know. Congregation Beth Simchat Torah. On the west side.
One of the oldest LGBT Jewish.
And he was on board for several years, so there is certainly a place that you can go if you are transgender and be very comfortable within the Jewish community. It's certainly not an ultra-Orthodox community. It's very modern. Really, it's a combination of conservative and reform. But you could, many people would feel at home there. I don't know whether you would feel at home or not. But my son-in-law, I guess in the first few years in which people transition.
We're nearing the end.
Okay.
If you have a question,
I'll go really fast. Okay. You tend to be out there. My life is my gender and my sexual preference. But then as you move on, you kind of move into society where you just go about your daily, and it's no longer really an issue.
it's really up to you. We're here. Do you have to run out?
I have another session at 1:45. It's kind of the media, so I would want to do lunch at some point, but we could do a few more minutes.
And you want to sell your book too?
Wow.
Okay, so Yiscah, you mentioned that you babysit for your grandchildren, so I guess I'm curious about how either your families or the Hasidic world, respective world that you've come from, have re-accepted you or always accepted you, or what the relationship, for both of you.
Yeah, that's a great question to ask after my reading. I'll just say, when I say my grandchildren, I don't mean my biologically born grandchildren, because I don't have access to them. But I have spiritual family in Yerushalayim, and it's those grandchildren that I'm very close with. We'll leave it at that for.
I also prefer usually not to talk a lot about it. I have my biological son. Nothing has changed since coming out, relationship with him. In public, I don't prefer not to talk about it too much. My family itself, out of my 12 siblings, or 20 if I count in-laws, I'm in touch with 2. I constantly still try to reach out to my parents. I'm doing my part, and so far it hasn't been, the reception hasn't really been that well, but I'm definitely still in touch with my family, and I'm definitely trying.
Just one, Abby, your course yesterday was, wonderful. I mean, on transgender, from the creation story, Adam and Eve, and going through the Kabbalah, right into it's superb, actually. The one thing that was very interesting, I mean, the idea of soul and Gilgul and Ibur and things like that, but also the fact that if all of us have a masculine and a feminine side, even though we might claim to be heterosexual. Have you talked about that in sort of psychoanalytic communities? Because, therapists, I think, I'm a social worker, would be very interested in that area of looking at how we behave.
I mean, it is, therapists are interested in it, and it is something that's discussed a lot in, specifically in academic, I'm studying gender studies in school, in academic gender-terry circles. It's something that's discussed a lot, and it is almost the accepted opinion of most scholars on the topic that that's actually accurate. They believe that that's with every human being. Everyone has some people the masculine is higher, some people the feminine is higher, some people hypothetically, and I'm not saying these numbers are accurate, there could be people who only have 5% masculinity and 95% femininity hypothetically, although it's not really a straight graph where you can put like brackets, it doesn't work like that. But most therapists that and then academics that I've spoken to, that have done actual like surveys and spoken to people, say that every person has both in one way or another.
Yeah.
You mentioned food stamps, that help you transition. And I know that in Jerusalem, the only place that I know is, which is a safe house, is by the Batua. So I like that. Of these and other institutions, how instrumental are they in their support, and what are their deficiencies? How could they be better?
In Yerushalayim, Abayat HaPatuach is not they're working more with youth at risk. That's their focus. So for someone who transitioned many years ago as an adult, that today that would not be a serviceable resource for me, but they're really servicing young people who probably need them much more. These are people, because they've come out more as gay and lesbian rather than trans, have literally been kicked out of their homes and they're living on the street. And a lot of their focus is on that.
Footsteps actually, they are very LGBT friendly, but they're not an LGBT organization. They're a lot more working with people who have left ultra-Orthodoxy. There's actually a few Footsteps members here, including a staff member who's there at the panel yesterday. I've gotten a lot of help from other LGBT groups. Specifically, the most I got is the LGBT Center on West 13th Street in New York City, which is big and they've done amazing work. I've gotten help in therapy with them and other amazing work. Jewish-wise, one of the organizations that I mostly am active with, first in terms of going to events, is J2I, and I've actually just last week joined their board in one way or another, still figuring out the details. And so J2I is Jewish Queer Youth, and they're doing really amazing work. And other organizations in the U.S. that do great work is Keshet. I've done some writing for them. There's a lot more we're doing. We're LGBT specific. I think we have a lot, not enough. And specifically for the trans community, I would love to see a Jewish trans support group, which maybe if I will have the resource and the ability, I would work on helping create and seeing it there. But we have support. We have adequate support. We could always use more.
Would you like to do that for Asia?
I've done that for Esha. I remember, like we actually had a support
But you
group.
said okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be at right now. I feel like as long as I'm in school, I wouldn't be able to take a lead in such an organization because I don't have enough time for that. But if there's I would love to help out, and hopefully maybe after I graduate, potentially I could do more.
All right, we should close, but I have a little more time. I have another session at 12:45, but I'll stay around. And thank you all for your